right, so here's part 2. So we're starting with goal 3. This is angle-pair relationship. So this is going to be very vocab intensive, but I want to talk to you about it, okay? So first we have complementary angles. These are two angles that add to equal 90 degrees. So any two angles that can equal 90 degrees are considered complementary when you add them together. Supplementary is two angles that add to equal 180 degrees. So those would be considered supplementary. Now, just remember, I want to show you all some examples. 90 degrees is represented by a box. So these two angles here, since when they're put together create a box, that means they're complementary. So you also had let's see, 140 degrees and 150 degrees. So you also had those two angles. These, remember, if we added them together and they were 90, they would also be considered complementary. Now let's talk about supplementary. Supplementary means it's going to be 180. And if you remember, when we were talking about classifying angles, a straight angle is 180 degrees. That would be a straight line. Okay? So these two angles here, because they create a straight line, are considered supplementary. And you're going to learn there's another name for that as well. Another example of supplementary angles let's say this one is 100 degrees, this one's 80 degrees. Those added together, they'd be 180, therefore being considered supplementary. Now, adjacent. This is any time two angles share a side. So, for example, these could be considered adjacent, but they're more than just adjacent, and you'll learn that in a little bit. The most particular example you would see for adjacent would be something like this. Because these two angles right here are sharing this right here, that makes them adjacent. So if they share a side, they're considered adjacent. Now, a linear pair. This is when two angles create a line. Remember how I was saying up here how this is something else besides just supplementary? It's considered a linear pair. Linear pairs can only look like this. Of course, this could be anywhere on here, but this is a linear pair because these two angles are creating this line when they're put together. Yes, they are adjacent, but ultimately they are linear because they're creating that line. Vertical angles. These are two angles that share a point, but no sides. And that's the way I define it. The book says something like two angles that are created by two pairs of opposite rays. But this is just an easier way to think of it. So anytime you see an X created, see how there's this shared point? The two angles that don't share any sides. They're also across from each other. They create a bow tie. They're considered vertical. All right, so let's do some more examples. So example 5. Find the complementary and supplementary of the angles. So remember, complementary means we're dealing with 90 degrees. Supplementary means we're dealing with 180. So if we want to find the complement and supplement to the angle, we need to subtract whatever we're given from 90 and from 180. So starting with our A, we have 68 degrees. So we'd say, okay, 90 minus 68. Well, let's see what we get. We get 22. So the complement is 22 degrees. All right, if we want to know the supplement, we do 180 minus 68. We get 112. So our supplement is 112 degrees. Now, I don't think you have any questions like this on your homework, if I remember correctly, but you could have questions like this on your exam, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and give you examples of that. I want you to try Part B on your own. Remember, it's just like Part A. On the PDF version of these notes, you'll find the answer to Part B, okay? Because I want to go ahead and go over example 6, because you will have questions like this on your homework. It says, identify the angle pairs. So remember, we're dealing with, here's the ones you're going to deal with. You're going to have complementary, you're going to have adjacent, I think I just misspelled adjacent, but whatever. You're going to have linear pair, and you're going to have vertical. So those are all of our options. Those are the options you'll have on your homework as well. Remember, it's going to be multiple choice. So let's look at this first one here. First thing I notice is I'm going to go ahead and make some arcs on my angles just so I can see what I'm working with. I do notice that we share a side, so they are considered adjacent. But the next thing I need to check is if they're sharing a side, are they creating a 90-degree angle? No, there's no box here, so they're not complementary. They're still adjacent. Let's check this one. Linear pair, are they creating a straight line? Yes, they are. So this is considered a linear pair. Some of you are like, I thought you said they're adjacent. They are, but ultimately they're adjacent angles that are creating a line. So their final name is going to be linear pair. So let's look at this next one here. Here's our two angles we're dealing with. Are we creating a box? Nope, so they're not complementary. Are they sharing a side? Yeah, they're sharing this side right here. So we're still adjacent. Let's see if we're linear. Are they creating a line? So here's our angles. Here's what they create. Some of you are like, but there's a line right there. But those two angles aren't creating the line. If you had this angle, it would create the line. But they're just creating this angle here. So the only thing we have is that they share a side. So our answer would be adjacent. And make sure you use this on your homework. It's really going to help you a lot because I've provided an example of each. All right, so let's look at this one here. So here's our angles. And the first thing I notice is that they do not touch at all. They do share a point, and they're opposite of each other. So if you remember back whenever I looked at the vocab, I said if they're across from each other and they create a bow tie, they're vertical. Now these are across from each other, and they're creating a bow tie. See it? So they are vertical. All right, and last but certainly not least, here's our angles. And the first thing I notice is that we've got a box involved. And as soon as you see that box, you need to remember box equals 90 degrees. So that means it is complementary. Sorry if my hand's in the way. It will move momentarily. All right, you will have problems like this on your homework. Remember, it is multiple choice. Okay, one more example I want to go over because you'll have problems like this on your homework where you're going to solve for x. And I think example 7, this is what you mostly have on your homework. I think this is the most problems you have. I think all the rest you have about 4 each. This one I think you have about 10. So they want you to solve for x, and this is dealing with complementary or supplementary. So what we're looking for is if you see a box, remember it's going to be complementary, so it would be 90. Okay, if you see a line, it's going to be 180, which makes it supplementary. All right, so the first thing I notice is that we have a box. Now let me tell you, if there's a box on one side of the line, there's a box on the other side of the line, always and forever. So I notice that our two problems that we know are creating this box. So we can say 2 plus 4x plus 44 equals 90. So if you see the box, take your two parts and add them to equal 90. So now it's just all about some math here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to do it a different way than the last one I did. Because I also want to provide the example of what you do if you just want to put all x's on one side and all the numbers on the other. So my only x I'm going to keep over here is 4x. And then we already have 90 over here, so I want to move my positive 2 and my positive 44 over here. So I'm going to subtract 2, subtract 44. So I get 4x equals, so I'm going to go, okay, 90 minus 2 minus 44. Oh, weird, gives me 44. All right, now remember, if it's written right next to each other like this, it is multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is division. Divide by whatever's in front of the x. And we get that x equals 11. Just an FYI, this is an exact problem from your homework. So I've just given you a homework answer. All right, let's do another one. Now, I know I kind of messed up right here on the picture. Bear with me. First thing I notice is that we are creating a line. My two angles are creating a line. There's no box involved. So remember, if there's a line, it is going to be 180. So I'm going to take my two parts and set it equal to 180. Okay, just like before, we're going to keep x's on one side and numbers on the other. So I'm going to keep 4x over here. And I'm going to move this positive 28, make it opposite. So I'm going to take 180 minus 28. So I have 4x equals 152. And just like before, whatever's in front of our x right next to it, that's what we divide by. Whatever you do on one side, you must do on the other. And we get that x equals 38. Again, this is exactly a question on your homework. So everyone should at least get 2 questions correct on their homework. All right, so that is all for this week's notes. If you have any questions, please ask me on Remind or on Google Classroom. Those are the fastest ways to get a hold of me. I will scan these in, so there is a PDF version of the notes for you to look at in case there's something you missed. And do not forget to take a picture of your notes and send them in on Google Classroom. I know some of you had trouble last week, but really try to get them in on Google Classroom, okay? It's a lot easier. I'm going to mess up grading if I don't get them all on Google Classroom, okay? All right. Thank you, guys.